Good evening. First, a truth check. The confirmed move here was not a Tier 1 confirmed pipeline shutdown by Mark Carney. The documented flashpoint was Ontario's March 10, 2025 decision to slap a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, and Premier Doug Ford's warning that if Washington escalated, he could shut that power off completely. One day later, on March 11, Donald Trump answered with a threat to raise Canadian steel and aluminum tariffs from 25% to 50%, with a higher rate set to take effect on March 12 before the White House later backed off. That was the real brink. That was the real shock. And the micro stakes were immediate. Reuters reported Ontario power exports serve 1.5 million homes in New York, Michigan, and Minnesota. BBC reported the surcharge alone was expected to raise costs for affected customers by an average of about $100 a month. This was not abstract. This was not a spreadsheet fight. This was the monthly bill, the kitchen table, the light switch. In plain English, here is exactly what Donald Trump demanded. First, absorb the tariff pressure. Trump made clear on March 3 that Canada and Mexico were not getting out of this at the last minute. They're going to have a tariff. So what they have to do is build their car plants, frankly, and other things in the United States, in which case they have no tariffs, he said at the White House. That is not subtle. That is not diplomatic fog. That is a demand to shift production, jobs, and leverage south of the border. Second, stop retaliating. When Ontario struck back through electricity, Trump escalated again. Reuters reported he ordered an additional 25% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum, on top of the existing 25%, to reach 50% in plain English. If Canada used one pressure point, Washington would hammer another. Third, accept a new trading reality shaped by force. On March 4, U.S. tariffs of 25% on Canadian goods and 10% on energy and potash exports came into effect. Canada responded with 25% tariffs on C$155 billion worth of U.S. goods, with C$30 billion effective immediately and another C$125 billion lined up after a 21-day comment period if U.S. tariffs stayed in place. That is the verified economic figure, not rumor, not spin, C$155 billion. And the documented goal was never hidden. Trump wanted factories, parts, and industrial investment physically moved into the United States. That was the pressure campaign. Use tariffs as a crowbar, use market fear as the hammer, use Canada's dependence on the U.S. market as the weak point. The unexpected reaction did not come from a screaming podium. It came from a cold, physical lever, electricity. Doug Ford did not just threaten a press release. He targeted a live cross-border flow. He said, word for word, I will not hesitate to increase this charge. If the United States escalates, I will not hesitate to shut the electricity off completely. He did not yell. He did not ramble. He did not look for poetry. He pointed at the wire. Why was that a masterstroke? Because it flipped the battlefield. Trump was talking about tariffs. Ford reminded Washington that this relationship is physical. It runs through steel towers, border links, generating stations, and real-time grid balance. Reuters quoted energy analyst Timothy Fox warning, there are gross price implications and reliability implications. That is what made the response powerful. It was not symbolic. It threatened the system itself. And it worked fast enough to force contact. Reuters reported that after the escalation, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick reached out, Ford suspended the surcharge, and Trump dropped the 50% metals threat the same day. In other words, the defender found a pressure point that Washington could not just laugh off. The script flipped. The man using tariffs got hit by interdependence. Behind the scenes, Reuters reported Ford had gone on U.S. television saying he was ready to cut off electricity exports unless Trump dropped the tariff threat. Then came the call from Lutnick. Then came the olive branch. Then came the pause. Ford flew to Washington with Federal Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc for talks. This was not theater for its own sake. This was coercion, counter-coercion, and then emergency de-escalation. Markets registered the danger. According to Reuters, on March 3, the S&P 500 fell 1.75%, the Nasdaq Composite dropped 2.64%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 1.47% after Trump said there was no chance Canada or Mexico could stop the tariffs. According to Reuters, on March 4, the S&P TSX Composite Index fell 1.7% to 24,572.0, its lowest close since January 13. Those are not vibes, those are numbers. And the macro danger was severe. Reuters reported that Canada sends 75% of its exports to the United States. Economist Craig Alexander warned sustained tariffs could almost wipe out 2 years' worth of economic growth. Reuters also reported that more than 2.4 million jobs in Canada depend on business with the United States. That is what sits behind every headline. A continental economy tied together so tightly that a blow aimed at the other side can rebound into your own chest. Let's track one real product, a pickup truck. Reuters reported that Ford builds its F-Series pickups in the United States, but also makes some truck engines in Canada. That means a product sold as deeply American still depends on Canadian industrial muscle. Reuters also reported that almost no American vehicle is made from solely American parts, and Barclays estimated Canada provides more than 20% of the parts in U.S. vehicles. So when tariffs slam that border, they do not just hit foreign competition, they hit the hidden organs inside your own machine. Now widen the lens. The government of Canada said more than $2.5 billion in goods and services crosses the border every day, and the Canada Energy Regulator reported that in 2024 Canada exported 4.0 million barrels a day of crude oil to the United States, worth $140.8 billion, while 86 international power lines moved electricity between provinces and U.S. states. This system is not tied together with thread, it is tied together with steel cables, pipelines, transmission lines, assembly schedules, overnight rail. That is why the aggressor's own system starts to crack. Reuters reported analysts at Wolf Research projected tariffs would add about $3,000 on average to the cost of a vehicle, and around $7,000 on models imported from Canada or Mexico. And Reuters quoted economist Craig Alexander warning that if tariffs were sustained indefinitely, they would almost wipe out 2 years' worth of economic growth. One truck, one engine, one part, one tariff. Then the shock wave spreads. There are really only 3 ways this plays out, and every single one matters to your daily life. A quiet deal. A boring statement. Tariffs gets softened. Both sides claim victory. Prices stop climbing. This has a real historical parallel. Reuters reported the United States lifted tariffs on Canadian and Mexican steel and aluminum in 2019, easing a major roadblock to the North American Trade Pact. That is the clean exit. Not friendship, not trust, just both sides deciding pain costs too much. No clean deal. Clock after clock runs out. Tariffs stay, retaliation spreads, countermeasures stack. That has a historical parallel too. The 2018 to 2019 metals fight dragged into wider retaliation on consumer goods before it was finally lifted. In this version, supply chains choke, utilities scramble, and companies freeze hiring because nobody knows what lands next week. Canada decides the old model is too dangerous and starts building around the United States instead of through it. Mark Carney has already said Canada needs to reduce reliance on the U.S., and Reuters reported he proposed a $5 billion trade diversification fund for ports, railroads, inland terminals, airports, and highways. If that mindset hardens, the map changes, not overnight, but permanently. Right now, nobody knows which path we are on, but you need to be ready. Now forget the speeches, forget the flags, forget the swagger. What does this do to daily life? It starts with power bills. BBC reported Ontario's surcharge was expected to add about $100 a month for affected U.S. customers. Reuters reported ISO New England warned that a 10% tariff on Canadian electricity would add $66 million in annual customer costs. That is the first domino. Utility costs rise, business overhead rises, store prices follow. Then the labor market feels it. According to Reuters, more than 2.4 million jobs in Canada depend on business with the United States. According to the Prime Minister's office on April 3, the Canadian auto industry supports more than 500,000 people across the country. According to the Government of Canada, over $2.5 billion in goods and services crosses the border every day. That means small manufacturers, warehouse crews, truckers, mechanics, tool and die shops, and local retailers all sit downstream from this fight. And the domino chain is brutally simple. Tariffs raise input costs. Companies pass them on. Consumers pull back. Orders slow, hiring freezes, layoffs begin at the edge, then move inward. Reuters quoted Windsor's mayor warning that 25% tariffs across the board would be catastrophic for the auto industry as a whole. That is how a border fight becomes a kitchen table crisis. Here is the strategy in plain language. Trump's tactic is pressure through tariffs, hit industry, force relocation, create uncertainty so companies move first and ask questions later. Canada's tactic under Ford at the provincial level and Carney at the federal level has been selective pain. Maximum impact in the United States. Minimum impact in Canada. Carney said exactly that on March 27, Canada would use retaliatory trade actions that have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impacts here in Canada. That is the doctrine. So what should you do? If you are listening to this right now, look at your budget. Call your suppliers. Prepare for costs to go up. If your business depends on auto parts, metals, machinery, fertilizer, or cross-border shipping, build in delay. Build in price shock, build in contingency. Do not panic, but do not drift. Financial experts suggest treating this as a volatility event, not a one-day headline. Reuters quoted wealth manager Gina Bolvin saying investors should prepare for more volatility. Reuters also quoted Tim Holland saying markets will continue to be unsettled and buffeted by the geopolitical headlines until there is a constructive resolution. That is the calm advice. Stay liquid, stay flexible, and stop pretending this cannot touch you. The world is watching, every word matters. The board is set. U.S. tariffs hit Canadian goods on March 4th. Ontario hit back on March 10th with a 25% electricity surcharge. Trump threatened 50% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum on March 11th before backing off later that day. More than 1.5 million homes were exposed to the power fight. More than 2.4 million Canadian jobs are tied to business with the United States. The clock is winding down. I am going to skip the political spin. I am going to track the real numbers. I am going to bring you the exact facts tomorrow. I am here to make sure you have the facts. Have a good night. Stay calm and check in with us tomorrow.